Hi there and welcome to Rethinking the Human Factor with me, your host, Bruce Hallis. Great to have you here with us on the show today. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, what's the show all about? Well, I guess the first thing is actually welcome. Thank you for joining us on the show. The second thing is, what is the show all about? Well, the show is all about raising awareness, influencing behaviour, and fostering an organisational culture where data protection are truly valued. Now, for those of you who have been tuning into the show since 2017, you'll be fully conversant with the fact that we're absolutely passionate here at the Rethinking the Human Factor about getting insights from people outside of the cybersecurity industry. Why do we do that? Well, basically, the challenge of raising awareness, influence of behaviour, and fostering an organisational culture, or the role of culture in terms of awareness and behaviour, is not unique to cybersecurity. So we've always made an effort to go and engage with people outside the cybersecurity industry and learn from the people that have been doing this for absolutely years, who've got lots of experience, lots of insights, lots of things, interesting things to share with us. But we also do believe in interviewing people from within the cybersecurity industry as well. And today's episode is a great example of that, where I have tuned in to some people who've been around in cybersecurity for quite some time. Well, 3 of the 4 of them have definitely been involved in cybersecurity for quite some time. And the 4th one is a relatively newcomer, but absolutely, when it comes to his particular area, his particular field, and how that applies to cybersecurity, he's right up there as well. So what have we got for you today? Well, basically, the interview that we've got for you today is with the 4 authors of the CyberSecurity ABC's book. Now, I was lucky enough to be invited to join the other 3 authors, and it was a really interesting journey. I mean, I self-published myself, but actually working with a publisher was a real learning experience. And so, I've been really fortunate to spend some time with these authors, both on the book, but also generally in discussions within the industry as part of networking, conferences, and all those sort of things. But we made a decision to write a book together, and that was published earlier this year in 2021, CyberSecurity ABC's book. And you can get a copy of that if you're interested in sort of the human factor from either the British Computing Society or Amazon. So without any further ado, let's get on with that interview. Hi there, and welcome to the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallis. Now, the show is all about raising awareness, influencing behaviour, and fostering an organisational culture where security and data protection are truly valued. Now, today on the show, we're going for a first. We're going to have 4 people on the show. I've only ever done interviews one-to-one. And so this is a record attempt at trying to cram some huge amounts of insights down the pipeline to you. And the 4 people that we've got on the show today are, the 3 guests that we have on the show today are people that I've been working with now for quite some time. And we've just recently published a book called the CyberSecurity ABCs, which is available through the British Computing Society, but you can also get copies off Amazon as well. So who are our guests? Well, do you know what? I'm not going to do their introductions because they know far more about themselves than I do. But I do know quite a bit about them, but I'm sure I'm not allowed to tell you everything. But yeah, I'm going to just introduce you to them all. So first we have Adrian, then we have Jess, and then we have Kieran. So folks, Jess, do you want to start off with an introduction to yourself and a little bit of the journey that you've been on?
Sure, thanks. Real pleasure to be speaking on the podcast today. So I'm Dr. Jessica Barker. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Cygenta, and I've worked on the human side of cybersecurity for the last 10 years. So been working with many organizations on awareness, behavior and culture and everything that entails for many years. And I'm really passionate about it. So as well as being one of the co-authors of CyberSecurity ABCs, I'm also the author of Confident Cybersecurity.
Kieran.
Thank you, Bruce. My name is Dr. Kieran Mcmahon. I am Director of the Institute of Cybersecurity. I'm also author of The Psychology of Social Media, published by Routledge, and editor of Psychology and COVID Media Technology. And that's a collection of books, insight into media and technology. And that's sort of my background, being an academic psychologist for several years and now working in the private sector, writing these books. I suppose my specialist area is the human aspect of cybersecurity and social media. And that's the area that I tend to work in, including things like online safety as well as information security and so on. And that's kind of what brought me into this neck of the woods.
And then last but not least, Adrian.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you very much. I'm also a doctor, Dr. Adrian Davis, so I don't feel left out in the qualification stakes. I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Information Assurance Advisory Council, and also I have been a consultant and an operator, if you like, across IT and information security for about 20 plus years. I also am a visiting professor at the University of Sunderland in cybersecurity. And a bit like Jess and Kieran, I lecture regularly and I contribute to other books and try and pay a little bit forward, I suppose.
Now, doctor. Okay. Now, one thing that all our listeners on the podcast know is that I take the whole human factor seriously, but I never take my podcast seriously. Okay. Prior to us coming on the show, I mentioned the Thompson twins to you, didn't I? I just bought an album from the Thompson twins from the 1980s. There'll be a whole pile of listeners that they will not apply to whatsoever. Just go and check out the Thompson twins. Because when I heard Jess say doctor, and then I heard Kieran say doctor, all I could think of is one of their best known tracks was Doctor, Doctor, can't you see him burning?
Oh, yes.
And I was like, I'm going to crack this one.
Thank you for murdering my memories of that song.
I was going to crack that joke. And then I was like, and then Adrian comes in and he's a doctor as well. So that joke's not going to work with three doctors in it. There weren't three doctors in the Thompson twins title. Anyway, I feel a little bit left out. I mean, who am I? Doctor Who?
Hey.
Oh, bad.
They keep coming.
Oh dear, one after the other.
Yes.
I had to work with you lot, honestly.
Work. We had a lot of fun.
Right.
We did.
Talking of, working with us, Adrian, do you want to because you really were, I guess you're the common thread across, all of us that were involved in writing the CyberSecurity ABC book. And you sort of brought us together a number of years ago in your role as the managing director at ISC Squared for EMEA. Do you want to just maybe explain what was it that you felt at that time in the industry required the industry to be rethinking, how it was the whole education and awareness human factor piece. And that sort of motivated you to sort of engage us all individually and then bring us ultimately together.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. It is a long story, but I think the key words I would come up with is dissatisfaction. And it was dissatisfaction as being a consumer of security awareness in previous roles. I remember doing horrendous CBTs about why I shouldn't click on links and why I shouldn't send files to my Google, all that kind of stuff. It was dissatisfaction actually with where we were going as a profession. The time when I was back at IC Squared, which wasn't that long ago, but I think everyone will agree with me that we were still very technical at that time. Everybody measured their success on the number of penetration tests and firewalls and viruses they caught, all that kind of stuff. And actually, as you know, and I hope our listeners understand as well, that's nothing. A computer is a tool. It's like a screwdriver. It's like a hammer, right? What sits behind it is a human being, and it's the human being that makes the computer do things. It's the human being that makes the decisions. It's the processes, it's the culture around them that help them do their jobs, make the decisions, and use the tools correctly. And I really just had this sensation that ISC Squared, because it had such a wide-ranging membership and because it had a mission to educate and keep educating its community, that we should take a stand and actually reclaim, if you like, the human side of security and start to actively get our members to think about it and to think about why they were doing security awareness, why it wasn't working. And instead of, as I said in the book, instead of repeating the maxim that's given to Einstein, madness is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. How could we make a difference? How could we change people so they didn't do the same thing and they got a different result? Yeah. And then fortunately, and this is where we all sort of came together. Fortunately, Kieran kindly spoke at an IC Squared event in Ireland. I think I saw Jess on Sky News. and then somehow managed to blag her contact details. I have no idea how I did it. Or I met her at an event after she'd been on Sky News. And then Bruce, you came and spoke at ISC Squared events. And then, so individually, I'd met you all and knew of your work. And then one day, and I have no idea when it was, I had what I like to call the good idea. And the good idea was, well, I know all of you three, and you all are very good at what you do, and you're all to do with people. Why don't I stick you in a room and see if we can help educate, and as I said before, reclaim cybersecurity back for the people? And that was the genesis of the ABCs, the conferences we did, and then the book that we created.
Yep. And those conferences we did as well. I mean, the one thing I do remember, Jess, I don't know if you got a view on this. Do you remember the workshops? The workshop tour of Europe?
The workshop tour of Europe. And they were packed. Because I remember, the first workshop we gave, and we thought, this is going to be something different for the ISC Squared members. And how is this going to go? And we were all really excited and interested to see. And we go in the room, and it was absolutely packed. And we had
Holland, was it? That
great engagement.
Holland,
I think so.
No, the first one was in Dublin. We did the first one in Dublin, and that was just like to see how it would go. And then we did the tour started in Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam, yeah, I remember, and those piano effects that were were around in Amsterdam as well. I just heard somebody's piano in the back. That was somebody's ringtone, wasn't it?
Looking at Adrian now.
Is that you, Kieran? Are you just practicing whilst you're here?
I wish I was. Hang on, off.
Yeah. I do remember that Amsterdam event. I remember the event in Dublin as a practice, but then the Amsterdam event, one thing I really remember was we would get a lot of people. And so your comment exactly, Jess, was like the room was packed. I remember there were people standing around the back.
Yeah.
And then we had the same session in the afternoon, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And the whole idea was, you're right, we went to Dublin to see how it would go down. I kind of had a sneaking suspicion that we'd get a lot of people rocking up to these events, but yet the uptake was tremendous, absolutely tremendous. I think we must have had a good 1,000+ people come through our events. And don't forget, we did Europe, we ended up in the Middle East, which again, where we were again surprised at how many people turned up, because the Middle East is in some ways less mature than we are, or we think we are, over here in Europe. So to see that many people turn up was, again, a nice surprise, but also it just drove home to me that it's all about the people. And we were offering something, an insight and a take on security that people hadn't heard before and were hungry and ready to hear.
So, Kieran, what do you think about the process that we went through with the book and coming up with CyberSecurity ABCs? Why do you think we're, I guess, as an industry, why were we sort of ready for a book that deals specifically with, the three core aspects of awareness, behavior, and culture?
I think I noticed in about maybe 2013, 14, 15, that kind of time, that any sort of security conference or conference in this sort of area, that there were definitely in the presentations that you'd see, which would usually start quite technical, but they would end up in the last couple of slides saying, but actually this is about people, this is about psychology. And I'm going, these guys are completely right, but they don't have the background into it. Like, they're getting there, but they're coming from a particular angle. And like, they'd start talking about, we need to talk about the human operating system. And I'd be like, kind of, but not really. And so I could sense that there was that kind of appetite there within the industry, within this sort of conference circuit, that there was something kind of missing. Yeah. And then once we started doing the workshops, I could see this is like the level of engagement. And I particularly remember the first time in Amsterdam, like all these like Dutch guys standing up and really getting into it. I always remember like they were pushing back and everything. And Adrian goes like, don't worry about that. It's the Dutch nature to sort of push back against authority. Like, it's a good thing. And I was like, okay. Because like it was all like that, and then in different places, like the uptick was slightly different, but it was still like you're really getting people kind of very engaged in the topic area, because the human factor sort of, it feels like a particular topic area that could be quite neatly defined. But I think as we found as we were writing the book that there's so many different elements to it, and I think as well when I found with my chapter that when if you look at behavior, you think, okay, it's cybersecurity behavior, but it actually breaks down into what is outlined in your company's security policy. Is there a security policy? And then you get down into things like passwords, locking workstations, clip phishing links. There's so many different elements to it. And in an awful lot of those areas, there is really no psychological research. Like there's nothing to base it on. So you kind of have to go with, and I think we did a pretty good job of actually saying, well, there's no research on this, but we can extrapolate and say that this is what would probably work in that area. So in the one sense, there's an industry need. And then in the other sense, there is what I call it like a big silo of research left to be done from a scientific point of view. Like the thing I really sort of found fascinating was the thing that, you talk about pen testing, the one that's nearly always done. It's the Stuxnet thing of dropping a memory key in a car park and seeing who picks it up and plugs it in. Like every security professional across the world knows how to do that trick. But has there been actually any scientific empirical research on that? I found one study. It's been going on for like decades, but has it ever been tested scientifically? Maybe once or twice. So I think it's a very interesting area from that point of view, in that the industry really needs it, but there isn't really that much proper psychological science on it.
It's interesting. When I talk to marketeers, and I even come from my training many years ago, there were a lot of marketing principles which were passed on through official training on my master's, on my degree, and from my BTEC and national diploma and all that sort of stuff. And you get trained on principles. Okay. And I would need to challenge my teachers. And I go, so where's the fact? Why are you saying that this is how it should be done? Why is it that 3 times in terms of advertising something, even in a normal traditional newspaper, produces the most effects? And it's the lack of research. So you've got a lot of people at the moment that talk about this is a good idea. And what they meant is, based upon their experience, this is a good idea. But just because they've got experience in certain contexts doesn't mean it's going to work in another. And trying to get a range of design principles, I think, is really important. And I think that's what the research could be doing for us in the future. Jess, awareness. When we all started really getting into this, the phrase was education and awareness. And in the book, you sort of got the hospital pass, which is, Jess, you look at awareness. And we were like, yeah, but it's really behavior and culture. Well, I know we all believe it's behavior and culture, but it's still, you can't get away from it. The term used is education and awareness. So how, in the context, when you think about your book and what you wrote in the book, how do you sort of explore that? It's not just about awareness. It's awareness as part of trying to bring around this change. Just talk to us a little bit about that.
It's so true, Bruce. And we all had those conversations, didn't we? And basically, it's starting out in the first chapter that I wrote of saying this isn't just awareness. And we still find now, I think people, when they think of the human side of security, they can think, oh, that's just awareness. And certainly that's where we were a few years ago when we were doing these workshops. It was rare to hear people talk beyond awareness about behavior and culture. But for me, the 3 have always been so intertwined. And that's something that I think we really recognize in this book, that actually you can't have just awareness. Awareness alone is not the answer. I think that's one of the subheadings in one of my chapters. But really, if you're thinking about what kind of culture you have, and if you're thinking about influence in culture, and if you're looking at behaviors and considering what behaviors you want to change, it's then about, okay, how do we use awareness to drive that change and to influence what we need to? So I really wanted to recognize that awareness is like the foundation, and you have to know what you're building on top of that. You have to know the behaviors that you want to change. You have to know the culture you're operating within and how you want to positively influence that culture. But you're always going to need to do that awareness raising. It's doing it in a way that is not just for the sake of raising awareness. As Adrian said earlier, we've all seen that kind of awareness raising done. We've all probably had it done to us, where it actually is just frustrating. It's even worse than it just being bad. It can have that negative effect. It can actually drive poorer behaviors and a worse culture. So getting awareness right is fundamental. It's not the only thing. It doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Adrian, as somebody that's sort of representing a big stakeholder in the industry at ISC², do you think our continued use of our focus on the education awareness phrase, not from ISC²'s perspective, but from a broader industry stakeholders perspective, if the rest of the industry continues to say education awareness, you think about PCI, ISO 27001, NIST, all these standards that, are sort of rightly or wrongly sort of set our targets for many of us that are true north for many organizations.
Yeah.
How much of a problem is it that we keep saying education and awareness when actually what we really meant was behavior and culture?
I think the key thing is we are on a journey here. We kind of, because we're all involved in information security, cybersecurity, day in, day out, we think it's been around for years. It's only about 25, 30 years old. And when we consider things like the ISO standard you mentioned and NIST, they have been created from the experiences of people in the last 10 to 15 years, when awareness was the be all and end all, because that's all we did. And, that previous experience is still valid. But again, it was still very technical at the time.
Yeah.
I think as we go forward, and Jess and all of us recognize this, that actually when we look at our industry now, it's much less technical, which is a good thing. We have technical experts, but we have people who talk about strategy, who talk about marketing, and who know what they mean, because they've either come into security from those backgrounds, or they've gone out of security to learn about it and apply it and have brought it back in. So I think these true norths, as you say, these standards, I think they will evolve as the profession and the contributors to them change and evolve themselves. I'm going to put my hand on my heart here and say, yes, I work with the International Standards Organization. I have written some of the ISO 27000 series. I've helped edit. I propose changes and make the 27001 and 2 better. They are changing, but standards take a long time to change because they are standards. So you have to go through a very defined process of change. Yeah. And very often they are slower than the industry they represent.
I was just about to say, it's almost like because the wheels turn much slower, that it provides this opportunity where, if businesses are thinking behavior and culture instead of education and awareness, then maybe what they would be doing is focusing on behavior and culture just to comply. And there's this window of opportunity where hackers, or whatever you want to call it, there's an opportunity where they're going, well, then we can apply these techniques around behavior and culture whilst the going's good, because the employees aren't in effect being trained to change behavior and culture. It's just about education awareness. And it's just like we did an interview with Char Sample, and I was talking with Char about, and you introduced me to Char, Adrian, actually, a long time ago. And we were sort of exploring the idea that if culture influences behavior, then could you leverage cultural values as part of how you design an attack? And Char went away and did some research, and she came back and she said, "You're not going to believe this. It works. There seems to be data which suggests that if you understand the culture of the people you're attacking, the organizations you're attacking at a national level, then you can use that to tweak how you're doing your attacks," which I found really fascinating. But what it tells us is that if the standards that drive much of how businesses focus on cyber take their time to change, that it creates this window of opportunity for others to exploit. And I know, I've read quite a few articles now about how people are leveraging insights into behaviors, the sort of stuff that Kieran would have talked about. I think Jess in the book and then I talk about that as well. So if you understand how behaviors are formed and influenced, you can use those to design your attacks more effectively.
But don't forget, whenever you have change, you introduce vulnerabilities because you're moving between two states. And, feel free to chip in here, Jess and Kieran, as I expound something. Because we are changing, the whole IT world has changed, not just because of the pandemic over the last year, but we are changing now from very much a centralized, IT knows best, here's what you work on, right? Run out of the basement, to a cloud where there are thousands of different ways of doing the same thing. There are a whole set of other things you can do. There's a massive amount of change going on, and that introduces vulnerabilities from that side. But also at the same time, we are seeing a massive amount of change in the way people address work, in the way people address technology, because I think one of you said this in one of our events, the people who are entering the workforce now have never known a world without the internet. We are of generations where we grew up without the internet. He says very carefully here, because I'm not going to get hit by one or two.
I'm in that group.
This is where you meant to chip in and go, how dare you say that, Adrian? But, we represent a particular set of values, cultures, whatever, and people coming into the workplace are bringing a completely different set. And all the changes I've outlined are kind of coming together at the same time. And they've only been reinforced by what we've had over the last year with the pandemic, etc. So as we see the change, there will be a period of greater vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
But the hope is if we educate people now and through the work we did before and the book and the work we're going to do in the future, we will be able to close that window to a reasonably small time frame.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about your chapters around the education awareness angle, what are the things that made it the key takeaway for you to say, like, when you think about this is what you really need to be thinking about?
So I think firstly, it was that important fact that you can't just focus on awareness, and you must think about awareness in the context of behavior and culture. I think also for me, a key message that I always want to communicate for people who are looking at awareness and awareness programs is to really think about the why, the why and the what and the how. Communicating why this stuff matters to the people that you're talking to is so fundamental. So making sure that your messages resonate, it comes back to kind of marketing principles, knowing your audience and making sure that you are shaping messages so they are relevant and that they resonate. And actually, just building on what Adrian has mentioned, the experiences we've all had with COVID-19 in the last year, that makes that even more important because people are stretched, they're stressed, they've got limited capacity. People, many people aren't in a workplace with their colleagues around them. So people are a little bit more isolated, they're at home, and they don't necessarily have the same energy and the same attention and capacity that they had in the workplace, as well as not having that network of people closely around them. And so making sure that your awareness messages resonate and that they help and that they don't ask people to do things that they can't do. So let's not tell people, they must have secure, unique passwords if we're not giving people a mechanism by which to have secure, unique passwords.
Yeah.
We have to make sure that we don't just rely on awareness, but we think about behavior and how we're facilitating and supporting that behavior, and also how we're driving that cultural change as well.
Kieran, behavior.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of a problem, I think, over what's happened over the last year, because it's certainly before the pandemic hit, our workforces or workplaces were becoming increasingly digitized and so on and all of that sort of thing. But there was always this sort of talk about work-life balance and, getting the balance right and getting offline time. And I think that has quite gone out the window over the last 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
And my fear is that on the one hand, lots of things that needn't necessarily be digitalized have been digitalized over the last year, and that's increasing the type of risk that Adrian's talking about. I would suspect you're going to have, because people aren't in offices together, they can't actually have those sort of what I call pull-asides that, you to sense check things with people. So you're going to have a lot more bad practices, a lot more shadow IT, all of that kind of built in. And I think, as you're saying as well, people more frazzled as well over the last year. And you're in this sort of space, which is very, very, like, your conversations and your whole social life is now based through the screen. And in the one sense, I think, like with any big societal impact like the 2008 financial crisis, like the pandemic, there's always a potential for doing things differently and doing things better. I suspect in the same way as happened in 2008, that potential will probably be lost and frittered away, because ultimately governments, societies, or elites that run societies won't want to change what they're doing.
Right.
So they want to do
Status quo.
Yeah, exactly. System justification.
Yep.
So I think that you can have all of these people working from home, want to go back in the office, but will it suit companies to keep people working from home? There's going to be a lot of different tensions at play that will work out here. Yeah. And my fear is that it will result in actually less focus on these human factors than we actually need. I think we were possibly getting to a head of steam up until, February 2020. And that there's a possibility that the kind of work that the likes of us do may in fact be disrupted and diminished unless we're actually quite clever in what we do next. And that's just me being devil's advocate here.
Yeah,
I think there's going to be a lot more need for this kind of human factor stuff, but we might necessarily get it because of the way that our society is going to evolve over the next 12 to 18 months. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. There'll be a lot more need for this sort of human factor stuff, but I'm not entirely sure that we're going to get it. My hope would be, when you're talking about things like standards and policies being set at a higher level, I hope that there will be some sort of insight into that, but my suspicion will be that there won't. And I think it will ultimately be up to private sector actors to actually make the push towards more human factors in cybersecurity, because I don't actually see governments doing it.
Adrian, on the point that Kieran's making there about how during the pandemic, people working from home, expected to work from home. I think Jess agrees with the fact as well that, once things, they're probably never going to return to normal, but more people will be working from home. Kieran points out that, it could very well be that businesses, instead of people coming in the office, they're all working from home. And that's how it permanently is. How do you think that might pan out in terms of the human aspects, the need to reassess how organizations try to influence behavior? Because one of the things that sprung to my mind, I did a presentation for the ISF, who you worked for many years ago. And in that, they asked me, the challenge of pandemic and how does it have an impact. And I said, well, one of the most immediate things for me from a behavioral perspective, how, if people forget the training they've done, what they do is they turn around and look at what else is going on in the office, don't they? And the point of reference, Kieran, you mentioned the point of reference there. And suddenly it's like, hey, that's not there. Actually, my point of reference is the children running around, or, I'm in a shared flat with 3 of my best mates. How do you think that's going to, do you think businesses are going to cotton on to that change in the environment and therefore the need to reassess how they've looked at the human factor?
There is a long answer and a short answer. The short answer is, depends on the quality of the management.
Okay.
One of the things that I've noticed through the last 18 months or so is there is still a hell of a lot of Taylorism around, which is people are expected to rock up at 9 o'clock and work on the assembly line until 5 o'clock and then they leave. And managers expect them to be there from 9 to 5 or whatever the time scale is. If it's an American business, it's 24 hours no matter what. Yeah, is that productive? I don't know. So I think there's a hell of a lot of Taylorism around. And that's where Kieran's comments come back, is that if management believe that people can only be productive and can only do work when they are stuck on a desk being watched over by technology or by their boss, then that is how they will reconstitute their business. If management believe that people are intelligent and are capable of delivering good work to timescales without supervision, then they will obviously look at how people work and where they work in a different way.
Right.
And really it comes back to our whole discussion about the ABCs. If you don't understand or recognize them, then how will you ever know what to use, how to use it, and how to make it work for you? So if you're a technology-led person who's told to write an awareness campaign, you're going to write technology, and you're going to write it in a technology way because that's what you know. And if you are a technology-driven manager, all your problems will be solved by technology, and you will, or if you're a Taylor-driven manager, you expect people at their desk working their mice down to, or their touchpads down to the chassis. I don't think, actually, I think Kieran's maybe a bit pessimistic. I think what will come out of this is maybe less of the bad stuff in some ways, but more, I hope, of a realization that modern business is not to do with putting people in a large room and expecting them to do stuff.
Right.
Modern business is about the achievement of targets, goals, and delivery of value. That's that's a conversation we could A, expand on, and B, probably hold forth on for hours.
But I do think it's interesting because you talk about performance measurements and metrics and, values, and the shift in terms of potentially how we used to measure things in the past and how we might want to start measuring things in the future. And I think that's a really, for me, over the last year and a half, and even I think going before that, as part of my work, the rethinking the human factor, he says, why do we, people will talk about metrics and we measure it against this. And I said, but why? Why does it have to be measured against that? Why can't we have another way of measuring that? And I'm going to ask Jess to come in on this one. When we think about metrics, metrics is something, whether it's awareness or behavior or culture, we all have to face. What do you think around the issue of metrics?
Yeah, metrics, I think, is actually one of the reasons why people valued or typically have valued technology more in terms of cybersecurity. I think I speak to lots of security leaders and CISOs who have struggled to get their head around having metrics on the human side and having metrics with awareness, behaviour and culture. And what I always say to them is, as an industry, we value metrics around the technical side and we trust metrics around the technical side, even when we know they are far from perfect. And we have to kind of accept the same with awareness, behaviour and culture. People think, you can't measure. The amount of times I've heard people say you can't measure culture, you can't measure awareness or behavioural change. And it's just not true. There are lots of metrics you can put in place. And I talk about this a little bit in my chapters. I am seeing a shift. I am seeing, particularly I would say in the last couple of years, and I've noticed this partly through Club CISO, more security leaders who value culture more highly. So this is something that gives me a hope that Kieran maybe is being pessimistic or outlining a possible worst case scenario that hopefully won't happen, is that I do see with my work with CISOs in Club CISO that actually culture has been the number one hot topic for CISOs for the last couple of years. And that has stayed the same for the last year. With all of this happening, actually more conversations opening up around awareness, behaviour and culture, more of a recognition that people are isolated. If someone gets a phishing email at home, they don't have a colleague next to them that they can turn to and say, this email looks a bit odd, what do you think? More recognition that actually we need to consider the human side and more of a focus on putting measurement around it. So my hope is that we're moving to a more positive place and a place where we're seeing more rigour around awareness, behaviour and culture. And I hope that remains despite the obvious changes that I think we're going to experience as we hopefully move out of this COVID world.
Yeah. If I can just jump in, one of the interesting things I've been, obviously we all work with CISOs, etc. That one of the comments I keep hearing, even now, is we only actually measure what we can get. In other words, there is no set of measurements. There are a lot of the measurements that CISOs rely on, they rely on them because they are produced by technology. Yeah. The firewall tells you how many attempts there are to breach it or how many packets were rejected. We only use the measurements we can get. And a lot of people struggle to go past that box. Yep. And this is where Jess's comments come to the fore. A lot of people struggle to go past that box to say, no, I don't care about the stuff I can get. I'm really worried about the stuff I can't get. Yep. And again, that's a mindset change as people become more sophisticated and as we move away from our technical background as a profession, we're moving into okay, so the technology tells me this, but that's only part of the story. People process technology. And the technology is always last and is always in the smallest letters. Just for the listeners, Jess and Kieran are actually nodding at this point, Yeah. But that's the point, isn't it, right? Because we've always measured the technology and we've forgotten the two most important things, which is, again, comes back to why we started all of this. It's all about people. It's all about people. Yeah. People are difficult to measure. Awareness is difficult to measure. Not because it is inherently difficult to measure, it is difficult for people who come from particular backgrounds to understand where you start and how you begin measuring. I'll tell you a quick story. I remember many years ago when I did my MBA that we were asked to develop a measuring instrument. Okay. Now, Kieran's going to know what I mean. So someone came up with a ruler, which is perfectly correct because it is a measuring instrument. But in the social sciences, a ruler has nothing to do with being a measurement instrument. See the difference, right? Because the person was technology-based or technically based, engineering-based, for them measurement meant rulers. It meant precision. It meant yardsticks. But from a social science perspective, it's completely the wrong thing. Yeah. And that's where we started to really break open that dam and go, guys, you can do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because even the concept of I think I may have used it in our workshops. I think I carried the foldable meter thing out.
Yeah, you did. You had that prop.
And before you had the meter stick, it was like, how do you measure distance? I mean, when people talk, I can't touch it. It doesn't have parameters to it, And you go, a meter is basically measuring the unmeasurable. We just came up with a standard, okay, which funny enough, since I moved here to France, the metric system originated in France. And it's in Paris, and they used to keep they had the meter and they had a various, and everything regionally, everything took a copy of it. And then at a regional level, there were copies that were distributed. And that was the whole process, was trying to standardize the approach. So it was the measurement, the metric, the confidence was in the fact that it had been replicated. It wasn't that it was a meter. It's just like we're calling it a meter. And it's actually, I think sometimes stepping away, the easy option is to look for what is readily available in terms of measurement. Okay, the harder option, but probably the option that's you can build confidence in and you can move in a different direction, okay, is to develop your own metrics. And that's something I'm a real believer in, is that you come up with your own metrics rather than just accept somebody else's metrics. As long as you're consistent about it and you can back it up some way, then yeah, you can come up with your own metrics. And that's what the French did with the metric system. And the British did with the imperial system. Yeah, that's just the way it is. There you go, Kieran. What have you got to say there? I can see crossed arms. This is the thing.
Well, I think the thing is, right, if I take Bruce's metric stick and I measure this room here, and it's 4 meters across, maybe it's 5 meters long. Room doesn't care. Room does not care when I call it 5 meters long. But if I'm measuring culture within an organization and say I have some measure for, I don't know, let's say team cohesion, or I have some measure that I'm looking at within an organization, and I've measured this one, I've gotten my measure, it's standardized, and I'm happy with it, and I'd say that team A is 90% cohesive and team B is 55% cohesive. They're going to care about that, and that is going to push back on, so they're going to come back to you. And I remember clearly when I was a lecturer, when I would say, well, this essay is only a 55, and they come back and then they start giving it all of that, and they push back on the measure. People care about how they're measured. Yeah. And I think it's the tricky thing that I would say to people who are trying to introduce this within their organization, is that you're going to have to adjust and refine these metrics as they go on, because it's very difficult to get a moral or a judgment aspect out of these metrics that you create that people aren't going to like. So I think we can get bound up in metrics. Metrics are very useful and very powerful, but they have a reflexive character within the social sciences that IQ, you can't even say IQ these days without it becoming politicized, because it has, it works better in some cultures than in others. So, and that has ramifications for all kinds of things. So I think when you look at, there are certain aspects of the human factor that are going to be way easier to measure than others. And it's as you get into the more nebulous stuff, it becomes really tricky. And for me, fundamentally, and to sort of link back to my pessimism bit a while ago, I think where this comes down to is that fundamentally bosses and C-suite people have to think about, all of your workforce is at home now. Do you trust them? Because if you trust them, that filters down into the decisions that you make around that. If you fundamentally do not trust your employees, well then this kind of stuff isn't for you. You go and give your employees a completely, powerless laptop. You block the network access. You put a surveillance camera on it, and you treat your employees like that, and see how many people see what kind of talent you can retain. And this kind of stuff, human factors, is not for you. That's fine. You can get one of those free phishing tests and say, oh, we tested them before, we tested them afterwards, the numbers went up. Okay, there you go. That's your cybersecurity awareness done. This isn't for you. But if you're the sort of employee or employer that actually trusts your employees, then this kind of thing that we're talking naturally filters down to that. But it also comes with the caveat that you're going to have to talk about culture, and that may be difficult to measure. And it may well be that, I always give the example, there was a place I used to work, and we had this strategy away day at the end of the year. And the first year I was there, boss was talking about how leadership and vision, and it's very important for successful companies have a vision, and they have this vision tied up in this little mission statement. And it's that's how you drive your company forward. And I was like, wow, this is really important. And he said at the end of his speech, he was like, we in this organization, we don't have a vision statement. So maybe that's something we need to think about. And I was like, wow, that's great. But in the following year, he gave a very similar speech. He still didn't have the vision there then. And I was like, okay, I see where this is going now. And I wasn't there the next year because I no longer worked there. And I didn't hear what he said the following year. But I think it's something like that. You have to kind of flesh these things out. And I think in reality, it's probably okay not to have a vision statement, but to actually be thinking about what your culture is. And that, of course, is your bread and butter, Bruce.
It is, but I was about to sort of do a hospital pass and pass it to Adrian very quickly. And go, okay, vision statement. Well, to any of you, anybody want to pick this one up?
Well, can I just pick up something I said earlier on very quickly, is that I think one of the problems with metrics, and Jess lightly touched on this, and Kieran did as well, is that too often we think of metrics as being a comparison of good versus bad. Mm-hmm. Metric, IQ, this is good, this is bad. It's not. We should be looking at this going, there's a spectrum. And what I really need to know, it comes back to what I said earlier on, what I need to know is where is good and where is bad. Because if I focus on the good to the exclusion of the bad, I'm wasting my time. Because I need to get everybody. I don't care where you are relatively. I just need to know which bits I need to improve so that everybody is at the same rough level. I think, we again, going back to the fact that technology driven, I'm harping on about this today, I apologize, but we think that 1 is good and 0 is bad, or whatever it may be, instead of going, no, this tells me where my effort and my attention needs to be directed next.
Yep. Okay.
And that means I can dodge the hospital pass, so it's one of the other two.
Well, it was it was one of these passes that goes flying in the air and it loops, so it's not thrown directly at you. It was never going to hit you that fast. But I was going to say, well, it puts out there, the number of organisations had a meeting with a member of the board or a couple of members of the board, been showing up towards the higher floors. And as I go up, suddenly I start hitting these posters on the walls, with like clouds in the background or something like that. And you get these statements which are clearly, it's like, this is the vision. Our vision is we're awesome, and whatever it is, we're customer service and all these things. So you can write something down in paper, you can put it in a poster, you can put it into your training, okay? New starter, week, bang, 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 about these vision values. But what is the culture? Is it what you say, or is it what is done, what you do? No, I wrote about this, so this is a test of whether or not you read my chapters at all. Okay, so don't worry. No competency assessment, okay.
This is where it should flip round and we should be asking you the questions.
No, but that's the thing about being the host of the show.
Oh, I get it. This is why it's done this way. All right, okay. So I'm going to now throw in the classic one, which is, well, it depends how you define culture, but also...
Brilliant.
But also, what goes on in the higher echelons doesn't necessarily actually reflect what goes on in the real world, in the trenches.
Yeah.
It's fine having aspirations and it's fine having lovely pictures of clouds or cats hanging off branches, and we've all seen these. They're just as bad as some of the awareness posters we've dealt with in security. It comes down to if management don't follow the posters, then everyone's going to go, well, it's not for me, is it? Because, simple example, another example from my dim and distant past, I worked in an organisation that went through a massive PC refresh. Everyone had to have a PC. Everyone had to go Windows, right? To celebrate the conclusion of the project, they had a picture of the CEO at his desk smiling, and behind him was an Apple laptop.
Oh,
wow. Do you know how many requisitions went in for Apple laptops the next day?
I don't know. Let's have a guess. Jess, how many do you reckon? In the thousands, though. It's got to be in the thousands.
In the thousands. Because everyone went, well, he can have one. Why can't I?
Yeah.
We had this, didn't we, in one of the workshops? Was it somebody talking about how one of the managers or one of the executives didn't have their pass one day, so they leapt over the security barriers? And we heard this repeatedly. Adrian is so right that what happens at those higher levels of an organization doesn't necessarily reflect the rest of the organization, but it does influence it. And for me, it's not about what leadership says, it's about what they do. And what they do has such an impact. And I think we all spoke about this, that actually if you see your boss doing something or not doing something, then it says that's acceptable. That's actually what we do. That's how we behave. That's our true values. And why should the rules be one way for leadership and not the way for everybody else? That's human nature to think along those lines.
I think so, yeah. I mean, that particular example happens so much with people jumping over the hurdles that they're thinking about making it a new sport for the next Olympics, I understand. So we'll see a lot of CEOs hopefully doing the hurdles along the track. It's strange shaped hurdles though. It's got these 3 prongs on it and they're flashing their card.
Along with the Japanese art of shooting yourself in the foot by your comments.
There is that. Anyway, let's move on.
Let's move on, that's culture.
Yeah, very so. Okay, right. So is there anything that you sort of definitely want to get off your chest in relation to the book? And I think I'm going to put this to Kieran first, then to Jess, then I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to ask Adrian to wrap up. As you know, the person that brought us together for the book had the responsibility of trying to keep the cats in line with the book, and then had to summarize, all our input up at the end there. So the shortcut, listener, is go to the exec summary at the end by Adrian. Okay, then I think that would be a lovely way to finish the show. So, Jess, let's start off with you from the book. Key takeaway.
I think if you're interested in awareness, behaviour and culture, or if you think you might be, if you want to understand and develop the human side of security in an organisation, then take a look at this book, because this book will give you practical lived experience as well as results from the research we conducted in our workshops, as well as findings from academic research. It brings that all together to weave through the importance of doing awareness, behavior and culture right, giving you practical advice, takeaways, next steps. And so check it out. And I hope it helps people. It seems to be helping the people who have read it so far. People are saying they're already putting in place the practical guidance and recommendations that we suggest. So check it out, and hopefully it'll help you move forward.
Cool. Kieran?
I was just trying to find a statistic there that's in the book. So it's basically around, from the workshops we did, we asked the participants how many of them could say that violations of security policy were equally sanctioned, whether it was by the CEO or somebody at the, in the trenches. Very few people could. So if you want to know what the exact statistic is, you go and buy the book, and it's in there in one of my chapters. I think the point really is about fairness and transparency in this sort of thing, which I think if behavior is enforced transparently and fairly, that feeds into the workplace culture, it feeds into your awareness. And I think that for me is the key thing around it. Other than that, I have to say, actually putting the book together was an education in itself for me, as well as, working with such a wonderful, handsome and talented team as yourselves. And I think that it comes through in the book. So I would recommend anybody listening to this podcast to head over to Amazon or Shop BCS and get yourself a copy ASAP.
There will be a link in the notes as well. I guess for me, Edgar Schein, for me, describes it much more effectively than I did before I read his book. But basically, if you don't understand the forces at play when it comes to awareness, behavior and culture, then you basically become subject to them. So this is the thing about the book for me, is about trying to explain some of those forces at play, the things that, by understanding what you mean by awareness, you can better understand maybe the forces that will affect awareness. The same with behavior, the same with culture. And so if you choose not to understand, to go out and to find out what those forces are, then the effectiveness of your efforts will be influenced by them. So you have a choice. You can either choose not to become aware and use that insight to increase the effectiveness of your efforts, or you can take the time out. And I think the book's a good starting point to sort of understand those forces at play, so that you can then go and tweak what you're doing to bring around more effective changes in employee awareness, behavior and culture. Adrian, here you go.
Right.
How would you summarize it all?
So let me summarize it in 3 ways. First and foremost, it has been a real pleasure working with the 3 of you. It was a bit of a gamble, actually, when I kicked this off, to actually sit down and approach the 3 of you and go, hey guys, I've got this idea. Will you buy into it and give me your time and your mind space? So thank you for that. The second thing I would say is that all of us recognize that this is a journey. This is not something you can do in 5 minutes. This is something that is not necessarily a lifelong passion. It is for some of us, but it's something that takes time. And it's something that requires a different set of understandings from perhaps the ones we're used to using, a different set of knowledge and skills than we're used to exercising in our daily jobs. And as a result, it is deeply satisfying when you get it right and when you start on the journey, because it changes you as much as it changes your organization or the way you do things. And I think that's a really positive thing here as well, is that the ABCs are not just about changing a culture in an organization, it's also about helping you change to become more insightful and more aware of your environment, if you like, the people around you. So that's the second thing. And the third thing I would say is the base of this, it's all about people. People work with people, people do business with people, people help people. And if we remember those three things and apply some of the higher thinking that goes into the ABCs, I think all of us will actually see improvements from day one. And at the end of it, we should hopefully see improvements in the cybersecurity of ourselves, of our functions, and of our organizations.
I think it was really well put. Really good 3 points there, Adrian. So thanks very much. It's been great to have us all together again. And I think it's worked. The red button's on, so something's telling me that it's recording. The important thing is, has it recorded everybody's voice, or has it just recorded Bruce? In which case, every listener's I've heard this guy speak so much, I really wanted to listen to the other three, actually. But yeah, it's been fantastic having us all together. Thank you so much for, everybody's so passionate about what they're doing. It's absolutely fantastic to know that you're out there and you're all banging that drum. So thanks very much for the time coming on the show.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Take care, everybody.
Well, I hope you got a real sense that when the four of us get together, that it's a bit of a laugh, actually. And even though we're totally serious about our subject matter and what it is that we'll be doing in terms of cybersecurity, information security, and in Kieran's particular case, psychology and how it applies within the digital environment, we do enjoy what we do, and we do enjoy being together as well. And it was an absolute pleasure to get us all together again around the microphones, all having a chat about, but more generally, the human factor when it comes to information security, cybersecurity as well. So yes, I hope you really enjoyed the show. Now, if you find that sort of stuff interesting, you've maybe checked out other episodes of the series going back now to 2017, and you're thinking, do you know what? I'm really getting tuned into this idea about, human awareness and human behavior and culture. What is culture? What impact do all these three things have? And how can I potentially apply that? Well, the good news is that I've brought out my updated version of training and coaching program here at the Rethinking the Human Factor. Now, this has been kicking around now since 2017. Lots of great testimonials about how people have really enjoyed the training and coaching options available through the Rethinking of the Human Factor. But we've invested a lot of time over the last 2 years reviewing the syllabus and coming up with a new training journey. And that new training journey now culminates in achieving the Certified Human Factor Architect status. And there are a number of courses before that as well. I think there's 3 courses which you take as a lead up to that particular status. And you can find more information about that training journey for people who are really, really focused on the human factor by visiting www.re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com/training. So yeah, if you're interested in these sort of insights, what other insights are out there, how can I apply those within the context of what I'm doing, then please do visit the training page and find out more about how I can personally help you. Now, if you'd like to make sure that you don't miss out on any further episodes of the podcast, how can you best do that? Well, really simple way to do that. Subscribe by your platform of choice. That could be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even Stitcher. So subscribe by any of those platforms and you'll get an automatic update when there's a new episode of the show out. And that's basically coming out at the moment every 2 weeks. The other approach is to tune in to either our LinkedIn profile or our Twitter profile and see the posts that get pushed out there as well. But if you're not glued to the social media platform, how can you stay tuned in? Other way of doing that, make it out in your diary, go and visit the re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com/podcast page, and you can actually subscribe through that as well. So that way, 3 options to make sure you don't miss any of these fantastic episodes for the show. Right, so who do we have on the show in the next episode? Well, it's really important to the planning of each series that we try finding different angles to explore the human factor in. And I think, in the 4 series today, we've had some success in doing that. The most recent, different angle we took was trying to look at things from an ex-data protection regulator's perspective, how they saw the challenges of the human factor in awareness, behaviour and culture. But the next show that we've got has a guest on who, for me, we explore a very, very different perspective when it comes to the human factor. And quite frankly, I sort of came at this from the perspective that a lot of the thinking around the human factor is about planning to prevent things happening, okay? And even, our work when we look at, how behaviours are formed and influence and how that can be used in a preventative sort of approach. So even with all the research that we've done at Rethinking the Human Factor about the role of culture and behaviour and awareness, what we came to realise in the industry was that it was very much focused, that forward-thinking was very much focused upon prevention. And somebody that's worked within cybersecurity, information security for over 20 years, I am fully aware that actually most security strategy is very much focused not just upon prevention, but upon what do you do when things go wrong. And so what we wanted to do was to explore, the human factor during an actual incident. And this particular guest has come on board and taken the helm in a very significant security breach. And we have a talk about what the human factor, what he learned about the human factor during that period of time. And it's really, really insightful. So I hope you can come and join us on the show. Again, a different angle from the Rethinking the Human Factor when it comes to understanding the challenges that CISOs, education awareness managers and security professionals face when it comes to managing human factor risk. It'd be great to have you come and join us. Thank you.